Welcome back. This is video 3 of the GED RLA series that I'm putting together for you. In this one, we're going to be looking at 2 quite long passages, followed by a few questions. Now, these are the types of questions that my students very often panic about. They very often their reading speed isn't high enough to take care of such a high volume of writing. So we're going to have a look at this. We're going to talk about some ideas, some approaches. We'll look at the questions and we'll see what's going on. Okay, so stay with me. Just always look at the passage first. What's going on here? So it says, use the following excerpts from items 7 through 16. Okay, so it says here, excerpt adapted from the dangers of the proposal of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to introduce grizzly bears into Idaho. A speech from U.S. House of Representatives, July 1997, by Congresswoman Helen Chenoweth. Okay, so that's the first thing. Just let me get my red pen. Here we are. Okay, red pen is functional. Okay, so we got a speech from a congresswoman. Then we have excerpt from the final environmental impact statement released on reintroduction of grizzly bears in the Bitterroot ecosystem in western Montana and central Idaho from 2000. This is by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So we can make a guess here that I'm sure the opinions will be different between these 2 articles. One's going to be for it, one's going to be against it. That's usually the way it goes in this test. And you can see there's a lot of writing there. There's a lot of writing. And many students panic when they see these many words on the page. Don't panic. Okay, don't panic. You have to be rational and approach this correctly. Okay, so let's just go to the questions first and see what is being asked of us. Always go to the questions first. Remember that. 7. What is Congresswoman Chenoweth's viewpoint? Okay, what is Chenoweth's viewpoint? Okay, so that's the first reading. What is her overall viewpoint? Next question. Why does Congresswoman Chenoweth compare the area that is to be used for the reintroduction of the grizzly bear to the states of Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Rhode Island? Okay, so we'll come back to that. What is the reason that the Congresswoman Chenoweth mentions the Lewis and Clark journals? Okay, and according to the environmental impact statement, what is the purpose of reintroducing grizzlies into the environment? And then which quotation from the environmental impact statement supports the underlying premise that grizzlies might pose a hazard to humans when introduced? Okay, so you read those questions and it sounds a bit of a mouthful, doesn't it? It sounds complicated. You start stressing, you start going, I can't do this. There's too many words, the questions are too complicated. I'm going to run away and jump in a lake. That's what you think, isn't it? Well, let's break it down and let's be rational. Look at the questions themselves. You can see that the first question is about Chenoweth, so that's reading 1. The second one is about Chenoweth, the lady Chenoweth. That's article 1 as well, reading 1. Again, reading 1. And then we're on to reading 2, which is about the environmental impact statement. So number 2, and then number 2. Right. So we know what we have to look at now. Now, one thing I would draw your attention to is this type of question here that you get in RLA. Okay, this type of question. It's a quotation question. And a little tip for you is that very, very often with the quotation questions, you can actually answer them without looking at the reading. Not always, okay? Don't go away and do some exam questions and then come back at me on the messages on YouTube and say, you told me you can always get the answer without reading on the quotation. I didn't say that, okay? Sometimes. But with this particular question, it's more often than not. So let's have a look at this one first. It says, which quotation from the environmental impact statement supports the underlying premise that grizzlies might pose a hazard to humans when introduced? Okay, so which of these quotations supports this idea here that, oh my goodness, Let me rub that out. Okay, that's a bit better. So, which of the options below, the quotations, supports the idea that grizzlies might pose a hazard? Now, if you don't know what a hazard means a danger to humans when reintroduced. So let's see if we can find anything that fits that. A, grizzly bears have been eliminated from approximately 98% of their historic range in the lower 48 states. Does that support the idea that they might pose a hazard? They've been eliminated, that they've been got rid of? No, it does not. Okay, so it's nothing to do with A. B, grizzlies were eliminated from the bitter roots by the 1940s after a century of intense persecution. So does that support an idea they might be hazardous to humans if they're introduced? No, this is giving you a historic background. So it's nothing to do with the reintroduction of the grizzly bear. So it can't be those two. C, all reintroduced bears would be radio-collared and monitored to determine their movements and how they use their habitat, and to keep the public informed through media outreach of general bear locations and recovery efforts. Okay, maybe. Let's go on to letter D. By designating the introduced grizzly population as non-essential experimental, bears that frequent areas of high human use act aggressively towards humans or attack livestock would be relocated or destroyed based on the actions of the Interagency Grizzly Bear Guidelines. Okay, so here we have bears that act aggressively towards humans or attack livestock, so cows and things like that, would be relocated or destroyed. So does this support the idea that grizzlies might pose or be dangerous to humans if they're introduced? I think it does, because it's saying here, if a grizzly does attack a human being or does attack livestock, so cows and sheep and pigs and things like this, if it does that, it'll be killed, destroyed, or relocated, moved somewhere else. So yes, this statement does support the fact they could be a hazard. Grizzlies could be a hazard if they're reintroduced. So it has to be this one, okay? So what I've shown you there, guys, is that when you have a quotation question, 9 times out of 10, 90% of the time, you can get the answer without actually reading the passage itself, okay? Most of the time. So there we go. So we've done the first one without reading anything. We'll just make our way up here. Number 10, according to the environmental impact statement, what is the purpose of reintroducing grizzlies into the environment? So why are they proposing putting grizzly bears back into the environment? Let's see if we can narrow this down a bit. To study the bears? Maybe. To make the bears tamer? Well, it can't be that, okay? So tame is the opposite. The word tame is the opposite of wild. Okay, so when a bear is in the zoo, it will be more tame because it's not in its natural surroundings, okay? When a bear is in the forest, into the environment, natural environment, it will be wilder. It's going to be wilder. So it can't be B, okay? Cannot be B. It's not going to be this one. To study the bears? Do you really think they're going to release grizzly bears into the forest that might kill people so they can study them? I do not think so. They can study them in the zoo, all right? So, to improve the bear's environment, well, I don't think they would be releasing grizzly bears to improve the forest or the mountains, okay? I seriously doubt that. So, I would get rid of that. I would be very, very confident that the answer is to increase the number of bears, okay? That's why they're releasing them, the grizzlies, into their natural environment, to allow them to flourish and just get used to their natural way of being and, have lots of cubs and increase their population. Okay, so as you've seen, we only have 2 questions about Article 2, and we've answered them both already, and that means we don't have to read this ridiculously long article by the US Fish and Wildlife Service, which I'm sure is really boring. Yeah, definitely. So we've eliminated that reading, which is cool. So let's see, we'll keep going up the questions from the bottom here. What is the reason that Congresswoman Chenoweth mentions the Lewis and Clark journals? We can't really guess that. Well, we can eliminate here. We'll go to D first. So who were Lewis and Clark? Okay, if you don't know, if you're not from the US and you didn't go through the US high school system, you probably don't know who Lewis and Clark were. Lewis and Clark were two adventurers who they went out to explore the West. When people were expanding westward in America, finding new lands and new frontiers, Lewis Clark were some of the first people that did that, part of that Western expansion effort. Okay, and if you can see here, they were the first people to explore this part of the USA, this gigantic part, okay? Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska, South Dakota, blah, 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 all of these places. Now, these places were actually bought. The US actually bought these from the French in 1803. And this gigantic part of the country, it's like a quarter of the country, they paid $15 million for this gigantic bit of land. I'll repeat that, $15 million. Can you imagine that? $15 million, what would that get you in New York City today? A shoebox to live in? Barely. Okay, so $15 million for all this. And Lewis and Clark were two of the guys that were first to explore this wild, wild area at the start of the 1800s, okay? So we'll fly back. Whoops, we'll fly back here. So that's what Lewis and Clark did. Why do you think she mentioned their journals, their diaries? Let's see if we can eliminate. To suggest the US Fish and Wildlife Service should read the journals? Maybe. To show that she is knowledgeable about the Lewis and Clark expedition? I doubt it. She's not going to mention it just to show off her knowledge, is she? I seriously doubt not. C. B, to suggest that Lewis and Clark knew very little about grizzlies. Do you think Lewis and Clark knew little? These hardened adventurers, I'm sure they were very well aware what grizzly bears were. Anything that could kill you out there, Lewis and Clark would have had a good idea what they were. So it's definitely not B either. I'm confident with that. So A or D? A or D? We'll come back to that, okay? So we'll have to come back to 9. And why does Congresswoman Chenoweth compare the area that is to be used for the reintroduction of the grizzly bear to the states of Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, blah, blah, blah? She is stressing how large an area it is in contrast to these states. Could be. She is suggesting these states are all smaller in size than Idaho. I don't think they are they? No, it can't be that. I don't think they are smaller in size. She wants everyone to know that there are no grizzlies in these states. No, it can't be that. She wants to stress that the states in the East Coast don't have much wildlife. Don't think so. We'll come back to that too, okay? And the first question, what is her viewpoint? Okay, so we're going to read through now the first one, the first reading. We've already eliminated the second reading by looking at the questions first. So let's read through the first one and see how we do. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has prepared a plan to introduce grizzly bears into a huge part of my district. Let me explain to the members that this would affect a significant portion of the state of Idaho. The area we're talking about is over 1/3 of the state. Just to give members an idea of how big that area is, let me give you a comparison. In this area, we could fit all the states of Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Massachusetts, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so she's trying to illustrate. She's trying to illustrate how big this area of Idaho is by comparing it to the other states. So we should be able to get the answer for that question now. Here. Yeah, here. Okay, so she is stressing how large an area it is in contrast to these states. So we can get rid of that. And it is A. Okay, so you can see, guys, if you eliminate firstly before you go to the reading, okay, eliminate first because it makes it much easier. Just by having those two options, we can very quickly get our answer. Okay, so boom, that's done. So let's find about Lewis and Clark here? Let's find, well, actually, no, because we have to find out her viewpoint first. So we'll fly up again. And, okay, you should be aware that the area they are talking about contains many populated regions, including the area around University of Idaho. Moreover, the border of the grizzly bear recovery area runs very close to Boise, wherever that is. The grizzly bear is a huge and dangerous animal, which makes for us a huge and dangerous problem. The grizzly bear is a large predatory animal, and provoked or unprovoked, it can move very quickly to viciously attack a human or an animal. In addition, the grizzly has special dietary needs. Just one of them requires between 10 and 168 square miles of land to live on, depending on the amount of food. Bringing back the unpredictability of the grizzly bear means that people will not be able to behave or work in the way they used to in this part of Idaho. Roads normally open will have to shut down. Hiking trails will be restricted. Camping areas will be closed. Hunting will be restricted. Livestock and logging practices will be dramatically altered. Bringing back the grizzly bear is really like allowing wildlife to take over. Okay, so she seems against it. She seems against the idea of letting the grizzlies in, because life will not be the same, as we're told in this paragraph. Hiking trails will close. Roads are closed. Camping's closed. So we can kind of infer that she doesn't think this is a good idea. Let's fly down. It's a well-known fact that grizzly bears are often violent towards humans and animals. Okay, so that's a negative thing. Okay, and while settlers may have recognized the beauty of these animals, they also understood the horrible threat they pose. Okay, so they're a horrible threat. At the time, there was no federal act to keep them from killing these animals. Thank goodness Lewis and Clark, here we are, guys. Lewis and Clark describe in their journals the absolute terror that they and the Indians had for these animals and how difficult it was to kill a grizzly. So Lewis and Clark felt terror when they saw a grizzly. They felt super duper afraid. Let's go down. That should be enough. Let's see. To suggest that they should read the journals? No. It's about them being afraid. To show that even Lewis and Clark were frightened of the grizzlies. Again, you can see, guys, eliminate first. Get down to 2 answers if you can. It makes it much easier then to get the answer quickly. What do we got left? The first one. Let's see. We already know that she's quite against this idea. So let's see if we can get the answer. Grizzly bears should not be introduced into Idaho in the way that the... Okay. C. Grizzly bears should not be introduced into Idaho or any other part of the country because they are ferocious. Could be that. It could be that one. Ferocious means very, very angry. Okay. Grizzly bears should be introduced into Idaho at the direction of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. Not sure. Grizzly bears should be introduced into the states other than Idaho in a slow and orderly manner. I don't think it's that one. We'll read on. We're not sure. So let's keep going. When I presented to the Fish and Wildlife Service these types of concerns about human risk, they too recognized the danger of grizzly bears. In the past few years, because more people are vacationing in our forests and lands, attacks have increased. Even with this plan, the Fish and Wildlife Service estimates there could be about 1 human injury or death each year. Let me say for the record, Mr. Speaker, not 1 human death or injury resulting from a grizzly bear attack is acceptable to this Congresswoman, to her. In fact, it should not be acceptable to anyone who values human life. Okay, so she's very, very anti this proposal. She's very much against it. And yeah, she's very clear there. Grizzly bears should be introduced. No, she doesn't think they should be introduced at all, anywhere. Okay. Grizzly bears should be introduced into Idaho at the discretion. No, because she thinks that they're too dangerous to be introduced. Grizzly bears should not be introduced into Idaho or any other part of the country because they're ferocious. Yes, because they're too angry. Grizzly bears should not be introduced into Idaho in the way that the U.S. Well, it could be that, but C is closer because it talks about the ferocity of the grizzly bears, which is something that lady is very clear about human risk, about the deaths, the dangers. So she's talking about how ferocious, how dangerous these bears are. Okay, so C is the correct answer. And I think that's them all. I think that's them all, guys. Let me see. Number 7, done. Number 8, done. 9, done. 10, done. 11, done. And that is it. Okay, so that is how you should answer these types of questions. Just to recap, make sure you look at the readings first, get an idea of what the context is and what the kind of think about what they could ask you. Like, what's this about? About grizzly bears? Okay, think a little bit before you do anything else. What is the context? Then go to the questions. Okay, go to the questions. See if there are any quotation questions. If there's a quotation question, see if you can answer it first. You probably will be able to. Then go through the other questions and try and eliminate down to 2 answers. Okay, eliminate 2 pieces, two options, so you've only got 2 options left. This will make it much easier than when you come to the reading. Then read through as quickly as you can and then flick between the reading and your questions if you get a hint, if you get any idea about what the answer could be. And you have to think fast, you have to act fast in this type of question. Don't get sucked in to reading all of both passages. You will not have to, but you have to be smart and know which passage you have to read or which parts of the passages you have to read. If you do what I tell you, you'll do much better on these questions. So that's the end of video 3. I hope you found it useful. If you did, give us some questions or some comments on the YouTube channel. We'll be back very, very soon for the next video. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.